Imagine knowing exactly what your students are learning and exactly which steps you need to take next.
Join us in Down with the Reading Quiz to craft meaningful and productive formative assessments that move away from gotcha moments of basic recall and toward assessing what your students actually can do.
In this 30-minute free masterclass, we'll share 3 powerful assessment keys that work for any novel at any time of the year.
Head to shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to sign up, and we'll also send you a free workbook to keep track of all your notes.
Once again, that's shop.bravenewteaching.com/masterclass to nail formative assessments forever.
Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching, and welcome to our debrief and strategy discussion episode for our 2-part interview with New York Times bestselling author Ruta Sepetys. And welcome, Amanda.
Hi, everyone. I think I have to I'm not going to tell this to Marie, but I'm going to tell this to myself. I don't want to spend the entire episode gushing over Ruta anymore because I feel like I have sufficiently gushed.
You mean because
it's really hard not to continue gushing over her?
Because listening back to the 2-part episode, I was cringing at both of us. Like, okay, well, all right, that's a lot. Okay.
Yeah.
Like that?
Because we've come so far in our relationship with her.
Well, that's true. We're very close. Yes.
Big update. I have since met Ruta on her book tour and hugged this woman. So yes, we are really not only huge fans, but we're jazzed about this episode and kind of finding some ways to help you practically fold her texts into your curriculum. That's the goal.
Yes. Yes. And the day that this comes out, actually, I will be going to her West Coast event. I think on the day that this actual podcast episode comes out. Yes. So that's very exciting. But today, friends, we are going to be going through just some takeaways from our interview that you heard last week and the week before, really talking about what really struck us the most about her, other than like her amazing talent as a writer and a researcher and attention to detail. It's just her passion for educators and bringing voices into classrooms and allowing children to be part of the conversation. So we're going to start just kind of there. And then we're actually going to do sort of a unit makeover style discussion of how we would use specifically her latest novel, I Must Betray You, but like it honestly works for all of her novels in the way that she writes her historical fiction for young adults. So we are excited.
Yeah, let's go. I'm ready.
Yeah. Make sure that you head to the show notes for this episode. Well, for all these episodes, but make sure you head to the show notes so you can join in on the conversation. This is part of our Camp BNT series, our summer series, where we are talking to authors about their works. We have works of fiction. We also have works of professional development for educators. And our focus, if you missed those episodes, is on voices and perspectives that are diverse and inclusive, and on including just like the appropriate strategies and practices within our classroom for curriculum, for instruction, for all of the things. And so that is where we are right now.
All of the things. And as per our tradition with a unit makeover type of episode, we will be creating a vision board to share with you. If you are like, what is a vision board and what are you doing talking about vision boarding in an education podcast?
Weirdos.
Well, welcome. You must be new. We're happy you're here. But a vision board is something that we will, first of all, just go check it out in the show notes, but it's just going to kind of guide us through pulling our unit together, and we are going to make one and share it with you in those show notes that you can download for free and enjoy as you do your own planning.
Yes. So if you want to get in on Camp BNT, you're going to go to bravenewteaching.com/camp or just head to the show notes. You know what we're going to do right now, Amanda?
What are we going to do?
We're going to cue the music.
You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a teacher from Southern California.
Join us at bravenewteaching.com to find out more about our courses, festivals, and get every episode's show notes.
We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show. So Amanda, last week, as you know, but I don't know if our listeners know, I had and this is like what we use in education with big old air quotes, opportunity to head up to my state's capital on a field trip with 77 fourth graders. One of them was the fruit of my own loins, and I love him dearly. And it was his first airplane ride ever. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with me and maybe the topography of California, I am in San Diego, down at the very bottom. I could probably throw a rock and hit the border with Mexico. Sacramento is in Northern California, all the way at the top. Not all the way at the top, but like very, very close. So we flew up and down in a day. In fourth grade, they learned a lot about California history. It was a very long day. This is not about California history. This is about that I, on 2 planes, multiple bus trips, and sitting in restaurants, read the entirety in one day of I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys. It was so good.
I am so jealous. I have not yet finished it because after our conversation, I was sent back to the OG books that I hadn't yet read. And I finally finished Between Shades of Grey, and I loved it. So between the two of us, we've got 3 of her many books. And I can also insider info. When I was at Ruta's book reading on her book tour, the audience asked some great questions, and she spoke to the fact that she is far from being done with this journey. She's got like 3 more books in the works besides the one that she was launching at the event. She is constantly writing. So if you're wondering if there's more coming from Ruta Sepetys, yes, there is, my friend.
This is so exciting. Well, the beauty too today, and in discussing like how we wanted to shape this episode so that we can make it the most impactful and useful for you teachers, but also just to like really do justice to these works. We decided, like we said before, to do kind of a unit makeover style. We're going to talk first about like our biggest takeaways from our interview. And then we're going to talk through how we would shape a unit, go about starting to shape a unit. Spoiler alert, I'm already in the works and trying to get I Must Betray You adopted as like a all-class text in my district.
Yeah,
so
you are.
If you know me personally, this is coming our way. Anyways, so the beauty of her text, though, is that these historical fiction novels that are written specifically for like teenagers, for a young adult audience, have a lot of things in common. She's got a very distinct style, and they all hit a lot of the same notes. And so talking through a unit makeover for one can allow us a lot of freedom to talk about a unit makeover. That would include many or all. But let's talk about, what was your biggest takeaway, my friend, from our conversation?
I thought that Ruta gave me the kinds of language that I wish I always had to answer so many of my students' hard questions especially about why do we have to learn this? Why do we have to learn about history? Right? They ask us this all the time. And she had so many eloquent moments where she was just so articulate about if we don't, what the consequences are, and how she spoke just so matter of factly, like it wasn't an option. And I thought that was like one of the most moving, even for me. Like I'm like, why do I ever struggle to kind of scramble up an answer for that question? And I thought Ruta answered that multiple times in the interview for me. And I thought, oh, all right, got my answer next time I jump back in with the kiddos.
There it is. I will say that, well, yes, absolutely. Well, and I think that part of it too is because she's just on the other side of it, right? Like she's not a professional educator, and therefore she's able to see with a little bit more of a bird's eye view.
Yes.
And when we're in it and it's everything that we do and we're steeped every day, and somebody asks you a very simple question and then you just kind of drool, right?
Totally.
You're like,
yes.
like hammer and nail. Like I have no idea how to answer that question, right?
Well, I think to your point, like that's exactly how it was, even just speaking to her on the literature side, the way that she just talked about story and the power of story. And like that was history. I mean, for her, those two things are exactly the same.
Right. They are hand in hand. Yeah.
Another thing that she said on her book tour that she had mentioned, a person asked about, how do you choose the stories that you write? Like, what are some of your requirements? And she mentioned, amongst other things, that it has to be recent enough history that she can still hear the stories of survivors.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when we kind of get into the unit makeover part, that to me is what makes, I think, her books so special, is that yes, they're history, but they're also written from the actual like spoken research, part from actual people who have been there, done that, like, and lived through it. And I think that that's just so cool. And she also said the other qualification was that young people had to have been at the forefront of either the what went down, the consequence, like they have to have been at the forefront of the event. Like those two qualifications, I'm sitting there thinking, like, how is she finding so many of these stories, and how long have I been living under a rock?
Right. I know you sit there and you're like, oh, we
Don't
collectively, and
Yes.
you and I don't know. We don't know nothing. we know literally nothing. Yes.
And I think it's just, I'm going to finish up. This is all part of my takeaway because I think it goes back to history. I think that one of the things that I love about what you and I are doing, and I think the movement of Teachers Pay Teachers and teacher authors, is stepping away from, I think, this textbook mindset. You and I grew up with a backpack full of textbooks, and that's how you learned. And it was up to the publishers of those textbooks to decide what the scope and sequence was, what the things that were needed to be highlighted were, and how long chapters were on each of these topics. And I just imagine a future of a much more hands-on, teacher-centered, teacher responding to what students need kind of a curriculum. And that gets me really excited because books like Ruta's kind of break down that wall between even having to have separate classes. I've talked to so many teachers who are like, I teach a history English class combined, and like these books are perfect. And I think they're perfect for a lot of reasons, but I think that that's the future of education. I think it has to start breaking down all the categories that we've created for ourselves and start being so much more fluid and responsive, especially with the internet. Why would you buy a textbook that was written 3 years ago? Because they fact checked that 5 years ago.
Right. And the rate of change and the rate of even just public response and sentiment is so much faster because information is so much more readily accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that it is kind of silly to continue using things that like we had in high school.
Yeah.
I was in high school over 20 years ago. Like, come on, guys.
Well, and it's historical fiction, but like to the point of what, but then looking at the author's process, that's where we kind of blend those two amazing worlds together. So
absolutely. Well, so my biggest takeaway I started talking about at the beginning of this episode, it's the intentionality behind bringing young people into the conversation. And I should have seen it coming because all of her novels are about young people at the front. Like you said, young people like adolescents, like older.
Requirement.
Are at the front of these moments in history, and like specifically to even I Must Betray You, like this revolution, this moment of resistance. It was the youth who pushed it for, and we'll talk more about it in a minute. And like how I think that is such a great fit for many classrooms. But I just have always been such an advocate for bringing kids into the conversation about themselves. It's not always, they don't need to be there for all of it. Like some pieces of it, there's a reason that there are the grownups around in school. Like there's a reason that we're there. It's because we're the grownups. And yes, we absolutely should be the default, but like, how are they ever going to learn to be advocates and be active in their own lives in different ways if we don't model it for them and allow them to practice within the safety net of school with us, with the grownups around? So knowing that these conversations about history and these conversations about like really ugly parts of history are intentionally inviting kids in to be a part of it, because quite frankly, things that happen politically, like, okay, I will absolutely talk about like politics and policy, and it's going to be on the next ballots that we see more and more about like women's health and more policy and law about women's bodies and a lot of people's bodies. It affects them. Like they can't vote on it. They don't really get a say like officially, but it affects them. So like, let's teach them and show them how to be part of the conversation and how to inform themselves. And these stories are an excellent model for that.
And if I'd say the number one struggle that I hear from teachers, and I empathize, is all around engagement. Yep. And if we're trying to tackle engagement, but we're not involving them in the process and in the way that our schools evolve and our classrooms evolve, we're not going to get engagement.
Like, what are we doing? Yeah. It's like, it's the same sort of thing as being like, okay, I'm going to make a dinner menu, but like, I'm not quite sure what these people eat. I'm just going to make what I like.
And that's what we're doing. And sometimes not in a bad way or in an intentional way. We're just forgetting that even if there are things that are in place that are must-dos, right? That are the adults only.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes.
That doesn't mean that we can't reimagine structure or the way or the how that we bring kids in alongside us. So
yes,
I'm with you 100%.
If you are new to Brave New Teaching or newer to Brave New Teaching, I highly encourage you to start looking at some of the backlog of like multiple seasons of episodes, because this is very much exactly where we're at here. We are all about challenging the status quo in classrooms, on school campuses, in philosophical conversations about education and like the trajectory of public education, especially. We so deeply believe in allowing students to have voice so that they can learn to the best of their ability. And that is very much what we like to talk about here. So shall we jump in?
Yeah. Well, and I'm just one last tiny little recommendation. And I'm going to make this recommendation for all of our summer camps. Is the books that we're talking about are quick reads for the adults.
Yes.
If you are, I'm just speaking to the Amandas in the room. If you are in a situation where you're teaching a mandated curriculum, a scripted curriculum, or you're being given all the books you have to teach, and your dream of bringing new books into your curriculum is like 3-year waiting list, right? Like I know that there are schools where you can't just bring a new book in because goodness gracious.
Yeah.
These books are perfect places to find supplementals. You can get through I Must Betray You and flag 6 or 7 passages easily that would be amazing pairings to go with the things that you are mandated, right? Like you have to teach X. Well, why not bring in the voices from some Sepetys novels to put those voices in conversation with the canon, right? And even if you want to teach the canon, and that's great too. Like I love teaching part of the canon too. Bring these voices together. Don't let this conversation be like, oh, well, I can't get the whole book in my class, so this isn't for me. It absolutely is. Read it for yourself, flag your passages, and you'll be really glad that you did.
Well, and the other beautiful part about that strategy is then it encourages students, it gives them that little bit of a taste. And it lets them have an opportunity to read something they never would have seen anything of. And then they'll go pick it up from the library because it is really that engaging. Yes.
Yep.
So
let's make over a unit.
Let's do it. All right. This is going to be kind of quick and dirty, friends, because we know you've already listened to 2 full episodes in our 2-part interview. So we just want to make sure, though, that we talk through, as veteran classroom teachers, what this would look like. So we always start. It's kind of silly because we know we talk about backwards planning. In that backwards plan, we start with a vision board. And part of our vision board is the look, the feel, the what do I want students to do with this novel? Where would this kind of fit? And I think of that in color. And Amanda thinks of that in clickable links.
I do. And color too.
And color too. It's just there are parts of our personalities that really shine through in these sorts of moments.
It's true.
Okay.
What's your palette? What does your palette look like?
Well, I'm going specific to I Must Betray You because that is at the absolute forefront of my mind. But I have got, because there's so much talk, I Must Betray You takes place in Romania during the communist regime. And it is all about the December of 1989. I was 6 years old, in case anybody was wondering. A revolution against communist leadership and totalitarianism. So I just kept picking up on, and I kept flagging the pages that talked about how gray everything is. These cities, we're talking about Christian, our main character, is stuck in a city. He literally trapped in a city, and it is just dingy, and it is gray, and everything is like drab neutrals, not bright Instagram neutrals. No. Drab, dusty. And so that is what comes to mind, is like these like grays, gray blues, like a really hazy sky with pops of red, because also under these sorts of regimes, we have violence.
And even that word betrayal to me is a slate color. It is dark. It is in Between Shades of Gray. Children are sent to death camps in Siberia. So we're going to stick with the grays, dark blues. I love that. And pops of light. I think that's Because I think that one of the things when we kind of imagine these units, we want to remember to one of the things we talk about in curriculum rehab is zoom in, zoom out, zoom in, zoom out. So
yes.
these stories are heavy, but if you remember from our interview, we also talked about the ideas of hope. And Ruta was very firm in believing that the power of hope is much stronger than the power of fear. And so although the stories themselves are incredibly dark, I would want to be very conscious about having light or like glowing elements. Maybe like the pieces on my vision board have that like a glowing backdrop, because at the end, right, like there are messages and moments of beauty and hope and survival and family that I think are what make the book so delightful, because they're not just like marches to the end.
Well, I mean, we also have to remember that all of these books, all of her historical novels, they're written from interviews with survivors. So like there is hope, right? There is something at the end. It's not that it's that way for everybody. And it is very realistic in that fact, these stories, but it's also, these are told by the survivors. Therefore, there are these beacons that things will end and change for their current situations that we're talking about. Yeah. So that's, I think, a good color palette, like some glow, some maybe light beams coming through. I think that two big words that would go on this vision board would be fear and hope, would be betrayal, would be resistance, would be, those are just kind of the words that I would see like floating around. What else do you see?
Propaganda.
I think I would put that, like, I almost see fear as like a umbrella with little raindrops, like propaganda, like police force, you know, like bread lines, like blackmail. Things like that. Yeah. Blackmail, you know, heavy artillery, like coming down from the, like as raindrops coming down from the umbrella, or maybe even it's a rain cloud. And then hope could be like, I'm really just hitting this one on the nose. This early morning podcast recording session has Marie being very cliche. Like a ray of sun, or like a sun. And then the rays are the different pieces that are coming off of hope.
Okay, it's maybe cliche, but you know students would love that. They would.
Well, that's the thing, is it would speak to them. It would speak to them. Well, and it's engaging. Like some of the reason that this sounds like in an elementary classroom is because elementary teachers have this shit on lock. Like they get it. Like, they know how to engage little ones. So if they can engage little ones, let's use some of that to engage the big ones who aren't all that different. They're just a bit grumpier with more colorful vocabularies.
Well, okay, so once we kind of got the vision board, we then move into my favorite territory, and that's essential question territory. And the reason we start with the vision board is because, number one, it gets everything out of your system, and then you can kind of start like piecing parts of your vision board together to build questions.
Yes.
Because the true danger of moving forward with a novel like I Must Betray You or any of the other Sepetys works is that there are almost too many threads to follow, and to keep the conversation going in a really powerful critical thinking direction. When we try to flood our students with, and this, and what about this, and what about that? And like when we squirrel all over the place, it's like it does not do what we want it to do.
It's highly counterproductive. It's also very easy to do when you're talking about history. Yes. So like we had another 2-part conversation earlier this year where we talked to our friend Andrea. You may know her as Educator Andrea. And we were talking about making over her unit using Night by Elie Wiesel, right? His Holocaust memoir. And I mean, that's all that was playing in my mind as I was reading this book, I Must Betray You. Totally. It was how bogged down we can get in the history of it all. And then you lose sight of the literature. You don't lose sight of the literature, but you lose steam, like Amanda's saying.
Momentum, yeah.
Yes. Because kids are like, oh, that's awful. And then they're checked out. And you want them to be like, oh, that's awful. How did they retain hope? Like you want that like train to keep moving.
And essential questions are meant to be that train. Like there's so many great metaphors for an essential question. I talk about it like as a spine, as a train, but it's meant to keep you focused.
It's really more for you, you shiny object looking educator. Quit watching the birds out the window and like when the disco ball turns getting, distracted. And by that, I mean myself.
And yeah, me for sure. That's exactly why I lean on them because, and we know too that like quality versus quantity is always what we want to go for. And kids need that scaffold of us being able to stack our close reads on top of each other, to stack our lessons so that they actually truly build. And if we're just kind of grabbing things randomly.
Mm-hmm.
So here are a couple of different categories that I think my essential questions would fall into, depending on what else I have that year, what else I have that semester, what hasn't been done, what has been done. I think for sure, Marie and I have talked about this a dozen times. There is a historical fiction genre question that this would be beautiful for. If you're going to do book clubs and you wanted to do a choice unit all about historical fiction, its purpose, why it should exist, why, what purpose does it serve if it's fiction, like something kind of juicy, like, what's the point? I think that would be an awesome direction to go.
Why not just make it nonfiction? Yes.
Right. I think that's not an eloquently put question, but that's the category you could go.
Sure.
I think the other place you could go, and I would love to do this, I think this novel would be so interesting to do from the perspective of a question around family. Ooh. And like the idea though, and I think this is true for the other two that I've fully read, of chosen family versus blood family. I feel like a lot of these books and a lot of these historical crises force people into new types of families and new types of connection that they weren't used to before. Like you have to separate from the family you love because of this horrible circumstance, but you find your people on the other side. And I wonder if there's a finding a non-blood family type of question.
I wonder if it's not about non-blood family. I wonder if it's about defining family.
Okay. So how does the concept of family extend beyond blood?
Yeah. Or how does the concept of family guide our decision making? Because then you've got the concept of family as your first
defining
line.
It. Yep.
And then you've got decision making, and then you've got the bridge between how decisions are made.
I love that. Does that check out for the I Must Betray You?
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Good golly, yes. Yeah.
Okay. I think that would be a really cool line. And it, like kind of like Marie was saying earlier, it kind of takes you out of the doom and gloom, horrible, like you're not going to spend the whole novel study, the whole unit only focused on the destruction of, the dictatorship or like whatever horrible thing is going on. It centers you on the idea of family the whole time. So your conversations are not always so difficult.
Right. Well, it keeps you coming back to, again, why the novel is written. It anchors us in the author's intent. You know what's funny? I hear myself right now. I have always been one that's like a reader response first type gal, but talking to authors about their works, I'm like, maybe I don't hate the idea of why did the author do this? I think it's because I hated why did the author do this when I was like trying to shove Of Mice and Men down kids' throats.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why did the author do this? And I was like, because he only cared about men. Like, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you.
Sassy broads.
Yeah, I know. Look at me. My feminism is showing. But like, and when I had no good answer for it, it was very, very hard for me. And that's my own personal flaw, right? Like that's me as a person and my humanity is showing. But I don't hate that question when we have spoken with the author.
Well, and I think it's really cool because, as those of you who know me, I put out essential question adventure packs, and I write essential questions all the time. And I have a lot that are about rebellion and society progressing and hope versus fear. Like it works for all of those, but those are kind of like really big generic questions that can work for other things during the year. So like if you're looking for something that's different, I think that's why kind of family was in my head as another way of exploring hope and fear and resilience and trauma and all these other bigger things. Like if those questions need to go to other novels, this would be a cool way to go. I also think it would be really cool to write a question about like Ruta actually posed a couple of them. I'll have to pull them in the interview.
She did our job for us.
About hidden histories and like what about this? What about using this for a research unit?
Yeah.
Like the first half is reading like what she did, right? Like this is what she created through research. Now you go find hidden history from your own family. You go find a hidden history and write, and it's a narrative unit. That would be kind of cool too. And being able to use students can use our interviews with her to like kind of hear about her process. She's got lots of great YouTube videos that she talks about her process and like how she's written her books. I think it'd be a great chance to give students the opportunity to write their own hidden histories.
That's so smart. That's so cool.
So the vision board is wide. The EQ options are wide, but we want to make sure that you have options because a year can look very differently depending on how you're stacking things.
Yes. And I mean, the next things that we would get into when we're talking about creating a unit, and those of you who have been through our course curriculum rehab, or even like our free unit makeover challenge that we're kind of like guiding through loosely right now, you know that the next step is the end. The next step is assessment. The next step is figuring out what skills are going to be assessed, and therefore what skills are going to be taught, are going to be practiced, are going to be honed. And then from there, content, blah, 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 blah. We've touched on a lot of these things. We've touched on also how to specifically, like we like to talk about decentering the novel. And what's beautiful in the way we've had this conversation is that we've talked about decentering it to the point where you could swap in a lot of different books for what we're talking about here. I mean, I'm very specific to the one that I just finished because I just finished it and I'm like super excited about it. But there are a lot of different ways you could go. I personally am normally a proponent of literature circles or book clubs, student choice reading. And this lends itself to that very beautifully. The thing that you just talked about, the unit where students read at the first half, this is the work and the result of research, that could totally be a choice historical fiction unit. Kind of the same way I did like choice memoir earlier this year.
Exactly.
Yeah, it could be exactly that. Because then they went and they wrote memoir. Then they go and they do the process. My brain is on fire with ideas. And of course, it's the end of the school year. So now I'm going to spend the summer making units.
Yep.
So cool. So yes, we would go into summative. And like we've already started with this conversation, the summative in like, let's take that one, for example, right? Yeah. A summative would be a research. I would say it would be in two parts. It would be a research and a report because those are the skills that we'd be looking at, right? Is
like an annotated bib or something?
Exactly. Annotated bibliography with like an abstract, maybe.
Yeah.
And then that would lead into historical fiction.
Yes.
Writing a short story. And look at all of those amazing skills. This would definitely be for my kids an end of the year project because that's a lot.
Well, and that's exactly what's going to be my point, was going to be this is a great thing to do when you have a long chunk of time that you need to cover. So in the Midwest, we have like from January to spring break with almost no breaks. But to build out a unit that kind of has a natural break, so like you have the first third is reading the novel. The next third is researching your own story. And then the third is writing your own fiction. That's actually like 3 mini units all under the umbrella of one that can get you through January through spring break nicely and in a fun, like engaging kind of way rather than trying to like trudge through.
Yeah.
They always put To Kill a Mockingbird at this time of the year.
I know. We've talked about it so many times. I know.
I don't get it.
I don't get it either.
Hard to exist at that time of the year, much less read along. But this will be a really, really fun, I think, project to do it that way.
That would be super cool.
I would love that. And if you did another EQ, Marie and I always have talked about 1,000 times, like doing a Socratic seminar, doing some writing. Ruta's work is absolutely meritorious of literary analysis for sure. If you're going to use her work, I mean, her use of symbol and character, I'd say in particular, and setting, I'd say between those 3 things, I mean, that would be a really powerful skill thread to focus on. If that's something that you need in your year, I would go that direction.
Totally.
Down. Yeah.
The other thing that we just want to touch on is supplemental texts and drawing those in. I mean, if you're doing a research into narrative writing unit, right? Like this is going to lead into research, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there you go. There's supplements right there. But just looking at any historical fiction, I think the best kind of a supplement you can do, and this is where you, as the teacher, can really sort of satisfy the knee-jerk wanting to almost like create a history course, right? A whole survey of history before you can even dive into a novel. Instead of doing that, you can look at contemporary to the time and space of the novel, artwork, news for broadcast, like you can really just dive in because they talk about reading things in, like, for instance, in I Must Betray You, they talk about uncovering information about what's going on in different parts of the world in a Time magazine. Wouldn't that be cool in the age of the internet to find that Time magazine and to find the Berlin Wall falling and to like different video and articles and artwork that were created contemporary to the setting, I think are really powerful supplements. Yeah.
I would love to, I don't have the exact name of it yet, but wouldn't it be great also to find some podcasts where does Lore, I want to say Lore does this, generally speaking, with folktales, like they're retellings of kind of passed down stories. So I love that this idea of like recasting old stories into something new. That would be kind of like a research into style. That would be kind of interesting. I know there's another, Dana Shapiro has something called Family Secrets.
Oh yeah.
As a podcast. And so she interviews people who tell their family stories to her. So like, I think that I would definitely require part of the research to involve an interview. That would be a cool podcast to have students listen to an episode and see how she asks questions to get basically the other person to tell the story. And she leads them through the storytelling process through an interview.
Yeah.
That would be very, very cool and hard to do in other units, right? Like,
yes.
For me, that's like one of the characteristics of a supplement is I try to hone in on the ones that are classic to the moment that I'm in and that I probably couldn't pull off with, another novel. Like I'm probably not going to do family history interviews when I'm teaching Gatsby.
I was just going to say, this isn't going to fit with Gatsby, is it? The other thing that would work in that same vein would be documentaries.
Totally.
Yeah. Documentaries where you really see the questions or you just see the answers and you can imagine what the question was that led to that answer. I think that would be great for like in this unit that you and I are talking about that's in 3 parts, that middle part, this would be an amazing supplement for that. Yeah, of like, here's the answer. How let's backwards engineer. How did they get to that? How did they get that answer out of that? That person didn't come in and sit in that like interview chair and just start spilling their guts. They were prodded.
Hopefully legally.
Hopefully not with like electricity. Okay. All I can think of is like a cattle prod. And then I distracted myself. We've already talked about shiny objects and my shiny object right now is a cow. I can't.
That's fine. And update for listeners that pay attention. I have since gotten rid of my cow mug that Marie
I feel guilty
me about.
Listen, I feel sad and guilty about it.
It's at Goodwill. Someone else is enjoying it until this person listens to the podcast and realizes that she now owns the cow mug that Marie hated. It's gone.
You know what? Listen. Our codependency is showing because I am not responsible for your actions. And yet I feel responsible for this one.
A little bit. I feel a little. No, I have a friend who's helping me home organize. And she told me I had to reduce my mug clutter.
And you were like, this horrible friend, Marie.
I stared at it for way too long and I said, I have to say goodbye. It didn't make the cut. It just didn't make the cut.
On the other hand, I was just showing Amanda a brand new mug that I got when I took my kids to Disneyland. It's Neverland, and I love it. It's my best friend right now. It's my mug.
You can lean into your mug collection. I don't have a place for my mug collection.
I know.
Which is what my organizer friend said. She said, if you want a place for it, we'll pick a place. I'm like, I don't have one. So
yeah, no, I thinned mine out and then was like, I'm just getting things that bring me joy. Anyways, friends, you know what brings us joy? These sorts of conversations. You know what brings us even more joy? Having these conversations with you all. So please join us at Camp BNT. Head to the show notes. Go to bravenewteaching.com/camp. Joining Camp Brave New Teaching is totally free. And it's summer camp for all of us nerds out there who like to read and talk about books and then shove them at children and say, you're going to love this.
And if you really want more, we would love to have you over in Happy Hour. There is an extended episode of like a third section of our conversation with Ruta is over there in Happy Hour. You can listen to it anytime. And we just continue all the good stuff over in Happy Hour. So I'd love to have you there too.
Absolutely, friends. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We cannot wait for the rest of this summer series to come your way. Have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time. Bye. Bye.
Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.